And a huge welcome to our guest conversationist, Beverly Knight. Respected gallery director and supporter of the arts. And football. It's a rare combination. Let alone your earlier gestation as a restaurateur.
Yes.
You are a woman of many trades.
Yes, I've got a few lives.
You've been quoted as saying you like artists with a totally different view of the world. Is that because you're constantly looking for that yourself?
Probably. Certainly from my youngest memories, always looking for something different. We went to school together and I was always the odd one out too, so always looking for something different. Didn't comply.
How were you? How do you mean?
Well, I think if you I was very quiet at school, very shy actually, but I always had a really strong idea of being independent and what I wanted. So, it was, it's interesting that you look back over your life and think you made decisions based on, that sort of wanting to be independent, I suppose, but also doing something, making the most of everything.
And looking for something other.
Yeah. And if I make a mistake, I move on really quickly, so I look for the next thing, so.
Did you have cultural influences in your background?
Not really. Once again, most of you here, you look back and you think, oh yes, my mother was very creative. She went to school in Kyneton, by the way.
Oh, really?
My grandfather was a baker in Kyneton. Her side of the family were pretty creative. They were traders, both sides of my family, father and mother, and long-term Australians, from the 1840s. So not convicts, but came out looking for adventure. So I think it's sort of that was how it was.
So
I was always very creative at school, and I went to St Columba's, and art just wasn't on the agenda. And when you're creative, my whole school life was very difficult, because art wasn't part of the thing.
So you've been interested in the arts from early childhood, have you?
Earliest memories, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. At school, I wasn't what you might term an academic. I was more the creative things, but I went to a school that didn't have the creative.
At a time.
At a time, it wasn't. Yeah.
Have you ever practiced? Did you actually practice as an artist?
I wanted to be an artist, and I wanted to go to the NGV. They had the art school then. It was like a 10-year course, but I started my first business when I was 4, so my father knew.
And what was that?
I made tea bags and I sold them out on the road to the. By the time I was 8, I'd set up a business, and my father knew that being an artist probably wasn't ideal for me. So I know it's funny, isn't it? When you look back now, it's funny. The business I started when I was 8 took me the whole way through school.
Wow.
So,
well, I'm sure it would be quite useful now too.
Yeah.
When did you first become interested in Indigenous art?
Well, at St Columba's, I remember being on the panel and the school debating team and debated the White Australia policy and thought it was a good idea. Because the nuns told us that, we were going to be invaded by the Yellow Peril, I think, But so really I didn't have any education. We weren't educated in anything Indigenous at the school I went to.
Many, I think.
In fact, one of the really interesting things when you look through the slides was the charity nuns that were at St Columba's were actually the nuns who were on Melville Island with the stolen children, including Michael Long's parents, And years later, I met some of the old nuns, and I asked them, why did you go to Melville Island? And they said we had to go at 16 as nuns and look after stolen children from across Australia. Well, we weren't told anything like that. So my first interest in Indigenous anything was, in my early 20s, I saw some art that I just couldn't believe my eyes, you know. So I started to do some homework, and there was nowhere to actually find Indigenous artists, but I just saw something very different. And
how did you see it?
I saw they actually turned out to be the Jeff Barton early boards, and the NGV people will know what I'm talking about, you know, that were painted in 1972.
Yeah.
And I saw them in the early set, just a few years later. I saw sort of images and things like that. I couldn't believe it, you know. So my husband and I were only in our early 20s, and we had started to look at some New Guinea art, but we were collectors, you know, we'd go to Joel's all the time, but our budget didn't match our eye, as happens, you know. So we found something that, you know, was affordable.